Hello, students, and welcome back as we continue our conversation about Chapter 2 on the Renaissance and the Reformation. In today's class period specifically, we'll continue to delve more into the medieval period, but also hit on two essential events, two essential aspects of history that will further move us in the direction of this period of rebirth and change in Europe. Basically, of people changing their society, changing their architecture, their artwork, their social systems. And those two essential events will be the Crusades and the bubonic plague, aka the Black Death. Please title your notes for today, Medieval Europe and the Black Death. So you may recall in our previous lesson, we talked about the rise of Charlemagne, the unification of Germanic tribes, basically transitioning society from those fractured barbarian states into one unified empire in the form of the Carlinian Empire. Things are going to change quite drastically on the European continent over the course of history. Again, we're really fast forwarding through hundreds of years of time. That's just the nature of world civilizations because there are so many topics to hit on. But now we're fast forwarded to the year about 936, where we'll see Otto the Great follow many of the policies of Charlemagne in unifying noble tribes and noble families and building a brand new empire, this one in the form of the Holy Roman Empire. We talk about many civilizations over the course of this class. This is one that you're definitely going to want to become familiar with, though. It's existing right in the central part of the European continent, positioned between France and then the East. Regions like Poland and a lot of those smaller countries we'll be talking about once we get to the age of imperialism and World War I. A lot of the countries that you're familiar with today, like Germany and Italy, do not exist yet. They are part of this larger empire. So, a couple key aspects about religion and the church. This is where we really began our course for a very specific reason. You may have wondered at the time why we focused so much on Christianity, but it's going to guide so much of our class over the course of the year. No one in the world wielded more authority and power than the Catholic Pope and the Catholic Church during the Middle Ages, and it was constantly a power struggle between the king, like the king of the Holy Roman Empire, and the Pope. And you're going to see this kind of go back and forth quite a bit. The Catholic Church wields an enormous amount of power through their rituals or sacraments that Christians believe are necessary to achieve salvation in the afterlife. Sacraments include things like baptism, confirmation, reconciliation, holy matrimony, and last rites. And the church also creates rules or laws that their followers have to abide by. These are called canon law. Christians who violated canon law or did not follow the word of the Pope and the Church risked being excommunicated or banished from the Church. For a Christian at the time, the absolute worst fate that could befall you. Don't forget, these people vehemently believe in the afterlife and they believe in their faith. So even if their life is poor on earth, they always have the idea that they will find salvation in the afterlife. So excommunication for these people could be the worst thing of all. Rulers could also face interdiction, which is basically a ban on religious services on their lands. Could be devastating because don't forget, their citizens are likely Christians who also follow the Pope, so you risk losing control of your serfs and peasants and knights if you are no longer able to practice Christianity on your land. So, a few other things to consider. As I mentioned previously, there was a constant power struggle between popes and kings and emperors. There are incredible stories of kings and emperors kidnapping popes, murdering popes, popes transitioning from being French popes to Italian popes, and how that altered the political climate in Europe at the time. The Pope was very much a political figure who wielded an enormous amount of lawmaking power. So depending on what ethnicity or background the Pope had, it could dramatically change society and life for people living in Europe. In one instance, you can see here on the PowerPoint slide, after a disagreement with King Henry IV, Pope Gregory the Seventh issued an interdiction against him, and he was so distraught that he ended up begging the Pope for his forgiveness for 3 full days outside of the gates of the Pope's mansion. So, just to show you the religious composition of Europe during this time, and the dates show 1096 to 1204, the era of the Crusades. The purple would be Christian lands. Again, these are territories where Christianity is the predominant religion. And then over on the side, the yellow would be Muslim lands. Think back to our very first lesson in this course. We talked about Israel and Judea, the original Holy Land, extremely important to Jews and Christians and Muslims. And this is going to be the site of the series of holy wars that I'll tell you about in just a moment. So by 1095, the Holy Land had fallen into the hands of Muslims. Think about the expansion of the Ottoman Empire and how powerful Muslim civilizations had become. Think of the Islamic Golden Age and their expansion through trade and the Silk Road. So Pope Urban II, the Pope at the time, calls for all Christians to stand up and fight to take back these lands in the name of Christianity. And this prompts a 300-year period of fighting between Christians and Muslims over control of the Holy Land in 9 crusades. And the term crusades means holy war. Just looking at this map, you can see, like, in terms of strategy, how difficult it would be for the Christians to actually be successful. Even though the Christians take the Holy Land back during the First Crusade, it's very difficult for them to actually hold on to it because, again, just looking at this strategically, the Holy Land is surrounded by Muslim territories. So even if they could take control of it for a short amount of time, it's very challenging. Once Constantinople falls to the Ottomans, gaining access to the Holy Land becomes very challenging. And that's where we'll see many scholars flee from Constantinople, then Istanbul, over into the Holy Roman Empire, and that will be one of the root causes for the Renaissance. So you may be wondering, why would Christians heed the word of the Pope and put their lives at risk? There are a lot of motivating factors to consider. Number one, merchants in Europe wanted access to trade. Don't forget, the Ottomans were acting as middlemen. Basically, they were like a boundary between Asia, which had a lot of desirable goods at the time, and Europe. So they were hoping not only to reclaim the Holy Land, but to open up these trade routes and then ultimately make more money. Knights, obviously, an opportunity to fight provided them with an opportunity to gain land and wealth. So if you were a knight and you were aspiring to become like a land-owning lord, the Crusades was one potential avenue for doing that. And finally, the most important is, regardless of what happened to you while you were fighting, you essentially were assured access to heaven. On one hand, if you died fighting in these crusades, it was like an automatic ticket into salvation because you died fighting in the name of Christianity. And if you were successful, of course, you would be automatically going to heaven anyway because you fought to reclaim the Holy Land and won. So just some consequences of this. The Crusades are important for a number of reasons, and I want you to keep in the back of your mind that all of these different things that are happening are paving the road to the Renaissance. They're all essential features leading us in this direction. The Crusades may have been terrible and brought about the death of countless knights and lords and men all across Europe, but it also brought cultural diffusion. Think back to our lesson on the Islamic Golden Age and all of those different advancements and achievements that were taking place in the Islamic empires. So as Europeans travel into the Middle East, they come back with a lot of desirable things. An increased desire for luxury goods like silk and cotton, sugar and spices, things from Asia, new technologies that were exclusive to the Middle East and Asia, like compasses and chip designs and gunpowder, and also new ideas like numbers and chemistry, algebra, telescopes, astrolabes, and all sorts of things like that. So, some effects of the Crusades. Feudalism as a concept, like the societal idea of feudalism, is going to start to decline. You have lords and knights traveling to the Middle East to fight, and as they're dying, people become very unsafe again. The guaranteed protection that lords were giving to serfs starts to evaporate. Manors also start to overspend on militaries, one donating to the causes of the Crusades, but then they also have to hire people to protect them as their knights go to fight in the Crusades, and they need protection from nomadic groups and barbarians and other groups that risked attacking them. Also, through traveling east for the Crusades, it introduced Europe to new trade routes with Asia. And you'll see in a minute that these trade routes become devastating for Europe due to the disease that it transports from the farthest most remote regions of Asia all the way back to Europe. But most importantly, the increased trade leads to people making more money, and with more trade and more merchants, populations shift once again. We talked about in the previous lesson people leaving Rome, like the actual cities, for protection, moving to the countryside. Increased trade and more money will lead serfs to move back into the cities. So, just to show you, this is what the population might have looked like in a European city during the Middle Ages, following the Crusades. Bustling, busy, people are active, but then something happens. The Black Death. So, as a result of these new trade routes, a deadly disease, a pandemic, makes its way back to Central Europe, causing devastation in the population. Those images of bustling European cities quickly become images of horror as thousands and thousands of people succumb to this horrifying illness. Images like this became popularized as the streets were filled with bodies and people perishing due to the blistering and boils and horrifying symptoms of the Black Death. You can see in this image people just being mowed over by this wagon led by skeletons. It didn't matter who you were or what your social status was, everyone was susceptible to die to this illness. Just to show you the transfer of the Black Death in like an actual map or image, as the manorial system declined and new trade routes opened, the Black Death is going to make its way from Asia to Italy first through trade ports, and then eventually all across the continent. So it's actually a result of rats being on trade ships and wagons, diseased rats to be specific, and they basically infect the population. Images like this became popularized at the time. This is the dance of death. People became obsessed with the concept of death and skeletons and dying because literally half the population was wiped out by this disease. People tried countless cures and remedies and potions to try to combat the Black Death, but there's no understanding of germs or disease or science at the time for the most part, so most of them did nothing. They tried isolation, locking people away, of course, prayer. They tried leeches to drain people of their blood to purify them. They tried to use flowers, like pomanders, to try to quench the smell. They bathed people in urine as an antiseptic to try to get rid of the illness. They put dead animals in the home to try to spiritually lead death away from the people and to the dead animals in their place. But nothing really worked. And this painting, this is from the 1800s, so it's from quite a time later. This is called The Triumph of Death, and it demonstrates that it didn't matter what your social status was. Everyone was vulnerable. It made no difference. Lords died, kings died, peasants died. The Black Death is just going to devastate the population of the world. Just some common symptoms. Actually getting the disease was pretty terrifying. You would usually begin with a mild fever that would become much more intense until finally you would have crippling headaches and migraines. Your throat would swell until pustules started to form, and those pustules would basically fall apart, and people's skin would start to shed. Nausea, vomiting, pain, aches, until the person ultimately succumbed to the illness and died. So I want you to take a look at this primary source document. This is from the Decameron, a famous work documenting the Black Death. Pause the video here and answer the question that follows. It asks, what was the Decameron and how did it describe the Black Death? So, in total, the Black Death is going to kill 25 million people in only a 5 year span. Keep in mind that the population of the world was substantially lower at the time, but this would approximately account for about one third to one half of Europe's population. Just a quick note, a common misperception at the time, oftentimes people associate plague doctors with the original outbreak of the Black Death, but this costume would not be used for quite some time after. The original Black Death is taking place in the 1300s. This type of costume with the beaked mask that they would put scented flowers and scented like herbs in to mask out the smell of rotting flesh would not be used until the 17th, 18th, and 19th centuries in later strands of the Black Death. So, how does all of this play into the road to the Renaissance? Everything kind of fits together like one neat puzzle, so just stay with me for a moment. So, because of the bubonic plague, we end up with mass death in Europe. This causes a labor shortage. And if you're familiar with basic economics, as there are more people available to work, that drives wages up for those who are still around and those who have survived. Because people have more money, this leads to a rise in the middle class. There are fewer poor people. There are people who have more of an income, more money, and therefore they spend more money. As people spend more money, the economy grows and gets bigger. And then we start to have a flourishing economy and investments in things like architecture, literature, artwork, and other, quintessential things that you'll see during the Renaissance. It's important to keep in mind again that the other, features of the Middle Ages will lead to the Black Death. So we end up with, Middle-aged Europe, the feudal system, the manorial system, the Crusades bringing about new trade routes, the new trade routes bringing back the Black Death, and then we end up with this timeline here. So just very quickly to wrap up, the term Renaissance literally means rebirth. And you're going to see during this time period a reimagining of society in a way that harkens back to the original Roman Empire and basically like a nostalgia for what once previously existed. Don't forget, too, we're also going to have scholars fleeing from Constantinople with many pieces of scripture and many pieces of writing about ancient Rome during this time. And this will also inspire a lot of these ideas to come back, too. So what are people being reborn from? They're being reborn from feudal society, this system where you were stuck in your social position for all of time without ever really having a chance to move up. They're also being reborn literally from the Black Death that wiped out half of the population. And it's really about a return to classicalism, a return to learning, a return to discovery. You can see in this painting on the left a vast transition from what you would have seen from like artwork in the Middle Ages, where there's colors and wide open spaces and sky and vast architecture, a completely different interpretation of life, if you will. In our next lesson, we'll delve more into the actual Renaissance itself, and then we'll continue to draw more comparisons between the Middle Ages and the Renaissance.